Hello, my name's Holly Purchase and I'll be your webinar host for today. We're expecting the presentation to last for around 45 minutes, followed by a question and answer session. Please note that we'll be muting the telephone line during the webinar, except for the speakers. So if you have any questions, please submit them using the question tool on screen. We'll be collating all the questions at the end of the webinar, and we will look to answer as many as possible. We'll also provide a written response to delegates of all the questions asked during the webinar. Following the presentation, we'll be posting a copy of the audio and the video from this session onto the Prism ID website, and we'll notify all attendees registered when it's available. In today's webinar, we will discover how a label lifecycle management platform can mitigate the costly risks of product recalls, recognize how to effectively manage local language labeling on a global scale, realize how using the right labeling solution can leverage existing enterprise systems and IT, and understand how to lower the cost of computer system validation while ensuring FDA compliance. We will then have the Q&A. Today we have two specialist speakers, Bill Cooley and Chaz Kelly. Bill Cooley is the Director of Global Packaging and Labeling Systems at Boston Scientific. Boston Scientific is one of the world's largest medical device manufacturers, with sales of over $7 billion and employs over 25,000 people worldwide. Bill has been with Boston Scientific for 15 years and has held various positions within the supply chain management, from Global Sourcing Manager, Director of Global Sourcing, and Director of Global Supply Chain Programs, to his present role of Director of Global Packaging and Labeling Systems. He has extensive knowledge and experience in developing and successfully implementing global change management initiatives, having directed Boston Scientific's Purchasing and Supplier Management Initiative, as well as their Global Rebranding Initiative. Currently, Bill is leading the efforts across the company to comply with the FDA's Unique Device Identification Initiative, and in the process, transitioning Boston Scientific over to the GS1 healthcare standards. He has also been a member of the Medical Device Supply Chain Council for 3 years. Chaz Kelly is a VP of US Professional Services at Prism ID. As an experienced project manager with multiple certifications in project management by global bodies, he actively looks after the professional services relationships for all Prism ID's US clients, including Boston Scientific. He manages the specialist requirements needed to empower Prism ID's clients to implement seamless label lifecycle management solutions to ensure their compliance and safeguard their reputation. Through his 15-year career, Chaz has a strong track record of leading and managing multi-million-dollar enterprise IT projects across multiple industries, including financial services, healthcare, and life sciences. Without much further ado, let me hand you over to Bill.
All right, Holly, thank you very much, and good morning, good afternoon, folks. As Holly said, my name is Bill Cooley. I'd like to take, a good 20, 25 minutes, folks, to go through and really explain from a Boston Scientific perspective, how we have streamlined end-to-end labeling life cycle management, and take some of your questions. So from an agenda perspective, what I'd like to do is provide a little bit of a company overview, talk about the hidden challenges of growth through acquisition. You'll hear Boston Scientific has been a very acquisitive type company, and with that, that has helped grow our top line, but it's also brought some challenges to the labeling area, and that's what I'm going to talk about. The other thing is, how did we fix the situation? So really, how do we turn the ship, get into building a platform-based approach, putting the pieces together from a scalability, long-term leveraging perspective, and then basically follow up with lessons learned and some key advice that I can share with you folks. So first slide, we talk about just briefly corporate information.
1 second, Bill.
Yep.
Thank you. Oh, I think we might have gone. Oh, there we go.
We're back. Okay, great. Sorry, folks. So as Holly had said, Boston Scientific is one of the world's largest medical device manufacturers. We employ over 24,000 people. We've been in business for 30 years. Our sales revenue in 2012 was $7.25 billion. We have our corporate headquarters, I should say, is in Natick, Massachusetts, and we have regional headquarters in Singapore and Paris, France. Next slide, please. From a core business perspective, we provide a broad range of high-performance solutions in the following areas. We focus in intercardiology. We're well known in our stent business. Cardiac rhythm management. These are really what they call implantable cardiac devices. So you're looking at defibrillators, pacemakers. We also have a division focusing on endoscopy technologies. Neuromodulation, which is a new business to us and very fascinating, has to do with stimulation of the nerve endings, basically. To manage back pain. We have electrophysiology, urology and women's health, as well as peripheral intervention. So let's get right into it. So I had started off by saying how Boston Scientific has been a very acquisitive company. So what I want to do is kind of just fast forward, or actually go back, let me say, to the early 2000s and talk about our packaging and labeling state of affairs. You know, in the late 90s, we had grown through acquisition. Actually, in a 2-year period, we had acquired over 10 companies, grew our sales from $200 million to over $2 billion. Bottom line is, in early 2000, you know, through these acquisitions, we had grown to 19 manufacturing plants across 6 divisions, but we were faced with the following challenges. We had a mass proliferation of packaging and labeling component sizes, styles, designs. If you look at the graphic that we have put up there, you look at that and you say, whose company is that? Okay, well, that's Boston Scientific at that time, but you wouldn't know it. We had over 20 different labeling systems. So think about that. How do you manage 20 different labeling systems? And it wasn't a situation where these systems, you know, were in the best state of affairs. I mean, these are systems that, you know, have been customized. They need upgrades. How do you do that over a very large company? We had multiple labeling review and approval processes. So what I mean by that is, you know, as we acquired these companies, we started the integration. We went into basically plant network optimization, looking to consolidate. But you had some of the receiving plants, you know, that would have 1, 2, 3 different ways of reviewing and approving labeling based on the plants that they were working with. It made it very, very difficult. We had non-standard software, hardware platforms. Source data issues, that's a huge one. So you could have situations where your design files, you know, may not match up exactly with your labeling. Major problem right there. Inconsistent naming conventions. So on one hand, you know, the name of the product, maybe product, X, and then you look into some of your records, your design files, and it has a slightly different take. So we have some issues with that in the past. And then the bottom line is you have overall labeling in various states of compliance. Next slide, please. So, you know, as I talked about, we went through that acquisition period, I should say. By late 2004, you know, these acquired issues had manifested themselves into really 3 major packaging and labeling related challenges.
Holly, can you help us catch up on the slide? Thank you.
Okay. So the first one we had, you know, was a lack of brand recognition. So if you look at the graphic again, you look at that and you say, whose company is this? And it was amazing because, you know, we had heard stories from, salespeople where they would work with the customer and say, hey, you know, we're Boston Scientific, you know, this is what we sell, and the customer would say, oh, no, thank you, you know, we buy from a company named Symbiosis or Simon. And it was like, wait a minute, that is Boston Scientific. So on one hand, we had a lack of brand recognition that we knew we wanted to address. The other issue was labeling compliance. Again, when you have a situation where you've gone out, you've acquired 10 companies in a 2-year period, you've got to be in different states of compliance. So we had a lot of issues back in 2004 with labeling compliance and you know, basically represented in the sense of PIRs, field actions. These are things that we knew we needed to make changes in. And then lastly, in 2004 was this OUS revenue risk. This is a situation that, you know, in the EU, They had passed the medical directive. It basically enables EU member countries to have their own localized labeling. So what that means is, even though you provide a DFU, those countries, those specific countries, can actually request and have that DFU in their own native language. That makes it very difficult, especially, again, when you're a company that has grown through acquisitions, multiple divisions, multiple plants. How do you get your hands on that? So really, again, just to repeat, our major challenges as of 2004, so we're looking to integrate the company now, is lack of brand recognition, labeling compliance issues, and then basically this OUS revenue risk. It's a situation that we needed to provide localized DFUs/IFUs, to our customer base. So from a global organization, we really knew that in order to improve the brand recognition, our labeling compliance, and really to address new requirements in this, ever-changing global regulatory environment, our direction from a corporate perspective was to move to a centralized global platform-based solution, which would then be leveraged across all divisions and manufacturing facilities. So what does that mean? As I talked about, we had 19 different plants, we had 6 different divisions. There's a couple ways you can go at it. I mean, you could have every division go out and come up with their own solution. That was not the right approach. Management looked at this, we had put together cross-functional teams, had many discussions, but really what we felt the best approach was to leverage, to actually develop one system that we could implement across the entire organization, where our divisions and our plants then could execute. So we're leveraging that. And one of the key things that we've done at Boston Scientific is we've expanded upon that. I mean, from an ERP perspective, SAP is what we use. That's everywhere. We use PDM to manage documentation. Now we have our global labeling system, which we'll get into. That we look to use these centralized systems, that we can work with our sites and divisions, develop, the solutions, roll those out, and then the divisions themselves and sites, they do the execution. But the question is, it sounds like a great idea, but how do you do it? How do you do it in a company that this size? Really what it comes down to is we looked at it and we developed 2 separate but independent initiatives. All right, so from a program perspective, we had 2 programs that we really ran these in parallel. One was called Global Labeling Controls. That project itself, or that program, that targeted manufacturing. The impact was the infrastructure core. It addresses brand recognition, it addresses labeling issues, field actions. So really, to kind of put that in layman's terms, what we did is we said, look, let's put together this big project, big program, Global Labeling Controls. Let's start from scratch. We looked across the corporation. We didn't feel like there was anything that we really wanted to leverage. So working with cross-functional teams, from our sites, divisions, we basically came up with this program, Global Labeling Controls. What it looked to do was it targeted manufacturing. It was the label that was put on in the manufacturing plants. Okay, we wanted to get that thing right, and as I said, that basically impacted our infrastructure. It helped create this core competency, it helped create the platform. In the process, it was going to address the brand recognition. We could start to standardize, have one look for the company, and then in the process, and most importantly, it would help us clean up our labeling. It would help us clean up, the source documentation. It would help, situations where we had, non-compliance or compliance issues with our labeling. Now, on the other side, so as that's targeting kind of the manufacturing and the branding and the labeling compliance issues, we also had put together more of an international type program, and that was lean labeling localization. The targeted area within the value chain there is we were looking at our distribution centers. Okay, the impact was our delivery, and really what that addressed was revenue due to localized labeling non-compliance. So again, said differently, in layman's terms, we were looking for a way to come up with a solution that we could apply localized, a country-required DFUs in localized language, and do that on the back end. Basically, come up with a system that we can do postponement. So at the last point of shipment in the DCs, we would look to apply this type of DFU, IFU to meet the country requirements. So again, the manufacturing approach for one program, distribution approach for the second program. So let's talk about the first one, global labeling controls. The key thing with this is it's much more than just branding. It really is an integrated labeling system whose processes bring all labeling into compliance with both internal and external requirements. And the key thing here is that it generates and verifies product labeling on one validated labeling platform, which we call the global labeling system. So let me pause with that. When we say the global labeling system, a key part of that is really, the solutions that you folks provide at Prism ID. That is the Prismatica. Medica is the software system that we utilize. It's at the time it was called, it was GLS, like in Global Labeling Systems or Solutions, but it was 1.4.3 was the version that we had gone live with. At the heart of the system, though, okay, so we have this labeling system that we're looking to develop, to build upon. It's our core, but at the heart of that, really how we resolve our issues is we created templates. And these templates are pre-built from standardized design rules, requirements, symbology, etc. You think about it, you have 19 different plants. You have 6 divisions. Why does every division, why does every plant need to go out and create their own labeling? Doesn't make sense. What makes sense is to get together as one company, as one cross-functional team, and talk about what are the requirements, get those agreements, lock those agreements down in templates, okay? The key thing is then those templates then can be executed by using your labeling system. But, going back to the templates, these templates are then populated with product-specific content, and the key thing is that we review and we approve all of that content through a set of standardized systems and processes. The key thing here is across all divisions, across all plants, from a labeling perspective, really the same.
Bill, you mentioned how you went across the enterprise and you talked to the various plants, various divisions. How did you go about sort of managing that requirements process? When you're talking about folks that have their own ways of doing things, their own, sort of, sacred items and things like that. How did you and your team go about getting to that set of agreements?
No, that's a great question. I mean, the first thing I would say, my advice and what we do is we build a cross-functional team. I can't stress that enough. So you want that cross-functional team, make sure people are all represented. But the bottom line is, to your point, you're going to have people with all different opinions. And you can get bogged down very quickly. But really what we ended up doing is we took all of the key functional leaders and we put them in a room. And really what we were saying is, okay, let's build a label. And we did it this way. What's a requirement? What's a nice to have? Okay, because you get a lot of nice to haves. But the point is, the real estate on a label is very limited. So you have to be cognizant of that. So it's basically 2 columns. What is the requirements? What's the nice to haves? And so we got the requirements, achieved, and if there was any special items in the nice to have that we could accommodate, we did that. And so we did add some things. We had added some fields for marketing. One of the things with our labels, we have what we call a differentiator, but it's the ability for marketing to add some additional information for the customer to help in product selection and use.
Excellent.
Yep. All right. So one thing, let me just go back though to the graphic to help you understand this approach. So really, what we have here is we have there's 2 work streams. If you're starting from the left to right, you have your labeling requests would come in. And what we actually did is we created this one team. We had one team of graphic designers, label designers, engineers, where the requests would come in, or the work would come in from the various divisions. And I like to think of it kind of as a funnel. So you would have this labeling come in at different states of compliance. And then there were 2 paths that would basically go. We'd assess basically the gaps with the labeling, but then we would put it through what we call the PLV and PLR process, and that really had to do with things that were pre-printed. So things like cartons, DFUs, but we had rules and a process behind how we cleaned that up. And the second piece down below was the GLD, GLR, what is Global Labeling Design, Global Labeling Review process. The key thing here is that we employed standardization. Okay, so we had it for pre-printed, we had it for post-printed. We had a team that basically ran this, and at the heart of the system, again, we had the global labeling system. In the end, all of our product packaging came out with a standardized look, basically an improved brand, consistent brand, and it brought everything up to labeling compliance. To talk a little bit, just about the architecture itself with the GLS or Prismatica solution.
There we go.
Okay. So let me take you a little bit through this. As I said, this is a standardized system that we employ at Boston Scientific, but it's used by all of our sites, and we use it to create, design, and print the label. So I'll quickly go through this. But the key thing is, graphically you have it on the right, and then on the left we have some of the key bullets and strengths of the actual global labeling system. The first thing is the data, the content. Okay, the content has to come from release source documentation. You can't have these things where you have marketing coming in the last minute and say, okay, the size is this. I mean, we actually back that up. We actually push back and had requirements that folks had to come to the meetings, okay, with the products, the approved product spec, let's say. So the key thing is you have to have release source documentation. Now, what we actually did is we kind of used the two-phase approach to actually create these labels. We created what we call an LST. It's a label specification template, but it was a tool where really what we did is we populated all of the content for a given label. In years past, and companies do this all the time, it's really just one process. Somebody puts all the content together on a label, then it's passed around and people review it. Well, what we found is, you go through 100 labels in a product family, you're going to miss something. Our focus was, let's take a step back. Let's focus first on the content, okay? I don't care what the label looks like, the design. Let's make sure that the content is accurate. So with the LST, what we actually do is we populate all the key pieces of information, the product name, the description, the size. But everything that is put in there is backed up with the previous item, a release source document, all right? This information, though, from the LST gets uploaded into these standardized labeling templates, all right? And then, these are predefined content fields. It pulls the data right from the database. And then what we do is we create this label spec. It's put into the BOM, bill of materials, and that's done with cross-functional PDM approval. We also tie in, our ERP, our SAP, system. And with that, we're able to pull in the batch and the use by date. And there's no manipulation. In previous systems that you can buy from other vendors off the shelf, the label designer has the ability to go in and change the expiration date. Not with our system. So our system is locked down. So, when the production order is established and the use by date is created, it is that date that is actually fed into the system. So everybody is working off of, the exact date. There is no other revisions out there. And lastly, once we actually print these labels, we do what we call component verification. All of our components, including the label, have barcodes. And so we verify to make sure, one, it's the right label stock, and then two, most importantly, it is the right label spec. So, there's a series of steps, that I've outlined, but this is really how we go about doing our labeling. It's a two-phased approach. Like I said, we focus on content, do a change request, then we actually do the label spec that gets printed, and then you're comparing your content, your approved LST, to the actual label. Now it's funny, when we came up with this approach, initially, some of the folks were, oh, this is going to take way much, too much time. This is going to slow us down. And it doesn't. What slows people down is when you rush through the labeling, get ready to launch, and then find out you have an issue. Or worse, you launch and then find out you have an issue in the field and you have to do a field action. So yeah, granted we have two-step approach, but it's for the right reasons, and it really saves us from those problems that companies face when you have the wrong information on the label. All right, so that was with the global labeling control. So again, if we go back from memory, that was that work stream that we had on the left addressing our manufacturing label. What I'd like to do now is talk, the next slide here, with the lean LOI system architecture. Really what that is that's the postponement element, okay? That has to do with the localized requests for DFUs, for IFUs from various countries. So again, in parallel to the Global Labeling Controls project, we had a cross-functional team that worked, with folks, within the divisions, within the DCs. But bottom line is, what we came up with is what we call a postponement system. Our feeling was, look, you're never going to come up with a DFU that's going to have every language. It's just not going to be possible. I mean, you may have a DFU that has 30 languages, and you're high-fiving because you did it, and then the next day another country requirement comes out, and now what do you do? How are you going to get this other one in here? And especially in our business, it's not a situation where you can just add a language, add paper, because there's sterilization effects that impact, and also you have situations where you add enough languages to this booklet, enough pages to the booklet becomes heavy and it can actually damage the product. So we thought about that, and what we had said, you know what, the best way for us to do this is to push this down to the very end, to our last distribution center. Before it goes to that before it's shipped to that final country, we will have a postponement, a processing step where we'll create a DFU. And that's what we did. We created a print-on-demand DFU. It's tied into those key systems that I talked about earlier. It's tied in with SAP, with our PDM system. And really what happens is, at the time an order is placed in a distribution center, there's a work order created. So, part of the work order allows the pickers to pick the product, but a copy's basically sent to our labeling area. And really that tells folks that, hey, there's going to be some postponement activities. They actually do print on demand. They print the DFU. It's basically funneled, through what am I trying to say? Through racks, let's say, okay, to the actual rework area or to the labeling area, and that's where they actually print that DFU. They go through a series of steps where they check, they do component verification to make sure they have the right DFU to the right product, everything's verified, it's attached, and off it goes to the customer.
Question. Yeah. Question. In addition to what you talked about in terms of significantly improving the change management process in terms of your local language HR, are there other benefits that have been gleaned from this, such as in sort of this just-in-time type of DFU generation?
Yeah, I mean, you'll see later in the presentation, the world is changing rapidly. And one of the problems that I think, medical device manufacturers, at least from the U.S. perspective, they look at it and they just think, domestic. They don't think about these countries. They think about, okay, let's create a label, put some languages on it, and that'll do it. That's not the case. Things are changing, and there's a lot of different requirements that are being asked from countries. And if you want to be a global player, you need to adhere. So there's extra labels, country-specific labels that need to be generated. There's DFUs. There's a bunch of different things that keep coming down the pipeline. And you will go crazy, trying to figure out a solution that you can employ upstream. We thought of all these different approaches, but in the end, we felt postponement was the best thing, okay? So this way you're not creating multiple SKUs for different countries and so forth. It's one product, but at the end you tailor it to that specific market. This is something that, as we'll talk about later, folks will see, we're leveraging as a company.
Good. All right.
All right, so next slide.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the end result, bottom line is, since its implementation in 2008, our labeling compliance issues have dropped to zero, so that's remarkable. Again, this was a major issue as a company because of the integrations, and it's an issue now for a lot of companies that acquire other companies, but we've tackled it and successfully integrated this, deployed this, and since 2008, knock on wood, we have not had any labeling compliance issues. Looking at the slide, the key message here is, we've created a platform that is expandable, all right? And that's the thing that you got to think about. This is not a one-time situation that you solve an issue and then that's it. You move on to some other project. Labeling is dynamic and it will change. From a manufacturing perspective, as I said, we did the global labeling controls. We standardized so all of our product has a similar look for the customer. Whether it's the label, whether it's the brand design, whether it's the languages that we put in our DFU, our second language DFU, that basically addresses kind of what they call the FIGs, the major languages. But also from a distributions perspective, we have our postponement system, and that is where we have these print on demand to address the other languages that we don't put in the booklet, and we continue to update those as new requirements or new countries come on board. So that was really kind of our first pass from a company perspective in creating a platform. I like to say it's kind of like the foundation. We created the foundation within Boston Scientific from a labeling perspective, and now once we have that foundation, we can build that house, and that's what we're looking to do. So next slide, please. And really, what has happened, so we did our implementation in 2008 over a course of probably 3 years. But I think everybody on the call has heard about, the FDA and this upcoming law for unique device identification. Well, that rule finally came true. So in September of 2013, the FDA passed a requirement for all labeling to bear a unique device identifier. Now, it's funny, from a company perspective, we were a HIVIX provider, or we have been in the past a HIVIX provider. We provide the HIVIX UPN. I include the graphic here, but we have our product, the UPN actually printed on the label. We have it in barcode format, so auto ID, so we have a primary and secondary barcode. So although we're compliant, to the UDI project, we are transitioning, over to the GS1 GTIN, which is a major project, to the company. And we feel it's the right thing to do because we're getting an awful lot of requests from our customer base. Initially, it was more from the OUS companies, but over the last few years, the industry has realized that there's synergies, there's cost savings, there's safety, patient safety issues and so forth, or improvements, I should say, if all folks go to one standard. And so we're in the middle of that, working with our customer base, but we made the decision to transition from the HIVIX UPN over to the GS1 GTIN. Now, a key thing with this, there's a lot of system work that had to be done, but one of the most important things to us, one of the key requirements is our labeling system, because our past system that we had, actually, if you go to the next slide, the 1.4.3 system, the Medica version, that system at the time did not have GS1 barcode capabilities. I mean, there was a way we could do it by kind of writing a little bit of, what am I looking for, some code on the side to manipulate it, but that wasn't the best thing. We realized that we could not do that on a wide scale, a company this size. And so bottom line is we did an engagement with you folks, Chaz, to upgrade to a major enhancement to our labeling system, where we actually upgraded our platform from GLS 1.4.3 to GLS 2.0. And that was really probably I call that a 2-year project, in terms of working together to develop, requirements, and then working together in the actual development and user experience. But it's been very successful. The bottom line is, we've completed it. The system has actually been completed. It's been rolled out this year. Key enhancements to the system that we like is, one is our own LST that I talked previously about, the label specification template. This is now web-based. It has the ability to track changes. So if you're actually doing a CR, you're going to see what is, you don't have to look at the whole label. You'll see the whole label, but the specific item that is being basically revised or changed will be highlighted. We have integrated source data, version control of translations, which is key because, again, we're a global provider. And then we have what we call SDT-driven LST maintenance. So it's something that we're always looking to do improvements. Again, we work together to make enhancements to the system so that it is a very user-friendly software system. From the GLS side itself, it is Medica 6.1, very nice system. It's web-based. In the system, we work with you guys to have new kit multi-pack functionality. We have built-in flexibility with bombs, so we're able to do flat bombs. We've improved the workflow. As I talked about with the first system, we use a 2-process CR. We would have basically review the content, then we would review the label spec. Now we've leaned out the number of CRs, so depending upon if it's a new label, it gets the 2. If it's only basically a refinement to an existing label, then we can actually have 1 CR. And the nice part about the system is that it can be integrated with external vision systems, which we are looking at. Just quickly to the next slide. All right, just all I'm showing here, folks, is with this process, we have converted over, or in the process, of rolling out with our plans, the conversion of our product labeling from the HIVIX UPN over to the GS1 GTIN. What you'll see from left to right, with the GS1 GTIN label, we prominently now display the GTIN. We're using a concatenated barcode. We've added GS1 2E barcodes to this. The key thing, too, with this program is with the FDA is you now have to have year, month, day. So a lot of label manufacturers, medical device manufacturers, just have year, month, including ourselves. But with this program, you have to change your labeling so it is year, month, day. So we think we've made some, major improvements to our label. Not only is the GTIN, not only by adding the GTIN, but we've simplified the label from a scanning perspective, and we've worked with our customers to get some good solid feedback. Slide. All right. So next slide. All right. So what's next? So we've, as I said, we're implementing this upgrade to the GTIN. Now what we're doing is working with Prism ID on a couple of programs. Really what we're doing is looking at, developing our next generation labeling system. And with that, we're building upon the global labeling system. We're building upon the platform. So again, you have a foundation. Now you start building layers. You start building up the house. But what we're looking at for next year, for our future, really is, a system, a way of doing country requirements, addressing country requirements. I was talking about with localization DFUs. Well, now it's gotten to the point where you have a lot of countries that are requiring their own label. Okay, so it has to be translated in their own language. So we're working on a program to address that. The other thing is serialization. We have a few businesses, like our neuromodulation business, that uses serialization. So we will be doing an initiative to include serialization into our global labeling system. And then lastly, we're looking at integrated vision system on a next release. So that is a situation where, yes, you can have an, with the 6.1, you can tie into a vision system or external. But what we wanted to do is have an integrated system so that the systems both talk. And we're doing that really with partnering with Prism ID. And then just last slide, just my key advice or lessons learned that we can help other folks with is you do need to understand your customers and your requirements. I can't say that enough. This is not a situation, it may be a global labeling system. It started out being more from it was corporate driven, but it was executed through the cooperation and the partnership with our divisions and sites. So the point is, you need to work with your customers, your internal customers. That is your sites, your divisions. You've got to understand their requirements, and externally, you've got to understand the requirements of the various countries. On being global, don't say it, do it. So we realize that you can't create one label. The other key things is don't box yourself in with your solution. You have to have flexibility. You have to have hooks because things will change, and that kind of leads into my next point. Labeling is dynamic, and it'll change. You need to change with it. And the one thing to add to is your management needs to understand it's not a one-time fix. This is an ongoing journey. So just be prepared for that and plan ahead. So Chaz, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Bill. Appreciate that. Very informative and certainly gives a very clear history of both Boston Scientific's evolution of their global labeling system as well as illustrating the partnership between Prism ID and Boston Scientific and looking forward to the path ahead on that last slide. Hello everyone, I'm Chaz Kelly. I'm the VP of U.S. Professional Services at Prism ID based out of our Greater Boston office. Know that anybody that's engaged with our folks is used to hearing that the lilt of the English accent, so I apologize for going with a bit more of a bass speaking style. So I'm going to talk today about sort of managing your label lifecycle management solution deployment. And this really is sort of an extension of what Bill talked about, really talking more about the implementation itself and best practices, so to speak, in order to get from point A, which is understanding the need for going to a centralized labeling solution as Boston Scientific did all those years ago, and actually making it a reality and rolling it out and gleaning the benefits from all of that. Next slide, please. So what about Prism ID? We are a leader in turnkey global label lifecycle management solutions. We have a strong track record in delivering global lifecycle label management solutions to all industries. Offices in both U.S. and Europe. Our global headquarters is in Wokingham, England, which is about 35 miles west of London. We have our U.S. headquarters, which is based in Westborough, Massachusetts, which oddly enough is 35 miles west of Boston. Yes, that absolutely was by design. We're deployed in over 50 life science customers with our medical web and medical solutions. We are recognized in Europe for our innovation. In the past year, we've been awarded the Queen's Enterprise in Innovation, as well as the IT Europa ISV of the Year. So as a solution provider, both in Europe and gaining a much stronger presence in the United States and North America, we continue to build a reputation of being that leader, as we point out, point one. We are a GS1 accredited solution partner, so we have extensive experience understanding GS1 requirements. We are also ISO 9001 and ticket accredited, meaning that we implement an internal discipline in terms of the delivery and management of our projects. Something that certainly customers in the life sciences industry expect and require out of their solution providers. So where does Prism ID fit? Obviously a loaded question. We'll try and get through it. We're experienced. We've been in existence for over 30 years as a provider of label lifecycle solutions. We're leveraging that and adapting to technology on a constant basis, as Bill pointed out with the latest 2.0 rollout. We have designed our solutions with 21 CFR Part 11 in mind, which certainly makes us a solid fit for anyone in the life sciences industry. We are a GAMP-V based or GAMP-5 based validation, basically meaning that we adhere to good manufacturing processes, guidelines in terms of the structure of our validation and the overall management and delivery of our projects. Documentation expertise, we fully understand both within CFR Part 11 as well as GAMP-5 the need for documentation, validation, audit trails, etc. So we provide extensive documentation as part of our solution in order to satisfy both customer internal requirements plus any regulatory requirements as they arise. And global customers with Boston Scientific, a globally recognized leader in the medical device industry. We have similar customers in terms of size and scale that are deploying, are either have deployed or are deploying our solutions. So best practices in terms of the deployment and management of a label lifecycle management implementation project. It's an evolutionary cycle, as you can tell by the sort of circular motion of the diagram. I'm going to start in the upper left corner. First and foremost is know your requirements, and I know that Bill touched in great detail on that. It is extremely important that you start out and spend a reasonable amount of time, and we'll talk about maybe some contradictory statements there, but to understand what your objectives are. You need to know what your business needs are. For example, during Bill's talk, he talked about the need for standardization, the need to homogenize, so to speak, all the various acquisitions and brands that Boston Scientific acquired in the late 90s. But that being said, there is a need to balance input over time, and what that means is it is absolutely critical that that you take a similar approach to what Boston Scientific did in terms of getting the stakeholders from the various business groups, your divisions, your plant managers, your IT organization, marketing, etc. And those stakeholders need to be involved in the process in order to get global buy-in, in order to get everybody on the same page, and to sort of march to a single drumbeat. But by the same token, it's you need to balance the process, and that you don't get bogged down too much. The reason is you could sit in a group of varying interests at the plant level, at the regional level, at the corporate level, and it could take years to get to a standardized or an agreed-to set of requirements. So you need to balance that process in order to, one, make sure that you're canvassing properly, but by the same token also not spending so much time that you never get off the ground. Third is system requirements. Business requirements, obviously the ultimate reason you're buying the solution in the first place, but you also need to factor in the technical side of this. This is obviously an IT-based solution, with hardware and software requirements on its own, but therefore, you need to understand what system requirements do you currently have within your infrastructure. You need to consider operating that this Bill's point around SAP or any other ERP system that you choose to use, any homegrown applications that are considered an integral part of your operation and cannot be changed. And finally, the path ahead, and I think that Bill really captured it right at the end of his presentation, which is you need to be aware of where you're going so that, one, you don't box yourselves in and sort of prohibit yourselves from building on this. And second, also, be prepared for, again, on the technical side, obsolescence. Where are you currently with your operating system and database platforms? Where are you going? Where's Microsoft going? Where's Oracle going? And making sure that you keep those in mind when you're defining the system requirement and end of it, and counterbalancing that, again, with the needs of your business. So you've got your requirements, you've engaged your vendor, we've got the scope, contracts are in place, it's time to get down to brass tacks and implement this. So you need to plan for contingency. When you're talking about a global rollout, time is of the essence. You've got an executive committee to report to, a steering committee, your business customers, the whole nine, in terms of when is this going to be delivered. Great, you've sold us on this product internally, we're looking forward to it, when can we get our hands on it? You always aim for the most aggressive timeline possible. However, as anyone who's ever been involved in an enterprise software solution rollout, things do not always go to plan and follow the happy path. There are going to be issues that get encountered, whether that's during the development cycle, during the vendor side validation cycle, or even in the customer side validation process. Life science customers have an extensive list of internal requirements and protocols in terms of satisfying quality control, and those can be lengthy and time-consuming. And therefore, when you're planning out your implementation timeline, you need to allow for the unexpected. If you don't, you will immediately fall behind the second that you encounter a challenge, whether that's in the software itself, the deployment thereof, or even some infrastructure and procurement delays.
And Chaz, if I could just add, to your point, from a customer perspective, the key pieces of information for us is to know your requirements and then that vendor partnership. Because like we have done through the years is work together on what those requirements are going to be. Make sure it's not, you don't want to have a situation where we put them on the back of a napkin and then hand them over to you and we don't talk. So develop those requirements together, actually work through the development together, with that vendor partnership. And by doing so, that you do have to plan for contingency, but that contingency should be much smaller.
Absolutely. A great point, Bill. Thank you for that. Yes, there's, and we'll put it the exclamation point, so to speak, on vendor partnership in a second. The next is you've got your plan, you've got your contingency baked in. Now it's time to maintain momentum. What can often happen, particularly when you're talking about tightly regulated processes internally, is that things can get sort of bogged down. We need 8 signatures and triplicate. And that's not to suggest that these controls are unreasonable. They're there for very valid reasons. but obviously these things can bog down the rollout of the project. And so it seems like, it's sort of, wait a minute, you want us to keep momentum, but you've told us to plan for contingency. Not a contradiction, but really a balancing factor to find that efficiency. Whereas, yes, you're preparing for the worst, but making sure that as things move on, you're really striking with the irons hot. A lot of times people get, split interest, they get assigned to other projects, they're trying to counterbalance things. A focused implementation and an integration of the team, as Boston Scientific, for example, has put together, is sort of an ideal way to make sure that you're maximizing the efficiency of your project. And then finally, as Bill points out, is vendor partnership. Throughout the life of a project, but particularly at the tail end, we stand ready to support your internal validation and rollout activities. What often happens is that a customer prefers to sort of go it alone. They've taken delivery of the system. Thank you very much, Mr. Vendor. We're going to go off and do our thing. Right. And so you go off and do your thing, and we go off and do ours. If there's a challenge, if there's a question, if there's a need for some resources, now we're talking about a re-engagement of the vendor that can be time-consuming or delayed, while some contracts potentially get negotiated. So it's important that part of your planning cycle includes how are you best going to leverage the expertise of the resources you have available. And we, as your vendor, are one of those resources. And we can do a myriad of things, whether it be training for your users and your admins, internal validation support as you go through your OQ and PQ activities. How can we assist and make that more efficient? Integration, bringing your label formats from your old system to your new system. You're not the first customer that's done it, and therefore we stand ready to assist them. And then obviously finally the system rollouts and making sure that your plans are going live. So we stand ready to provide a various number of services to get you from really what's point B, which is delivery of your solution, to point C, which is rollout of your solution into your production environments. Next slide, please. So our implementation process, it's fairly standard in terms of a software lifecycle management, software development, SDLC type process. If you look down the columns on the left, you're talking about the various phases. These are our terms. They're fairly standard. You're talking about an initiation, analysis and design, development, test and validation, and implementation. The pinkish colored ones are items that are handled either by the customer or jointly between the customer and the vendor. The blue squares are primarily done by the vendor. So you look at these are pretty standard. You've got a kickoff meeting where the two teams get together and set forth the agenda and objectives of the project. Requirements review the requirements to make sure that both teams are fully aware and are in sync with what needs to be designed. We go off and do our functional spec design, which is then reviewed and approved and accepted by the customer. Again, sort of a technical contract that says this is what the system will do upon delivery. It ties back to the requirements. Then we go and we develop a solution and we do some unit testing. We then move to a functional testing in a more formal environment. We participate with our customers in a customer acceptance testing so that there is a witnessed, agreed to understanding of we have seen the system and this is what it does before the customer takes delivery of it. We then go through the standard sort of qualification parts of it in compliance with sort of the GAMP 5 terminology, installation, operational performance, IQ, OQ, PQ, culminating in a go-live where the customer has rolled out our solution to its plants and is gaining all the benefits that were set forth in the requirements at the beginning of the project. And here's sort of another view sort of tipped on its side a little bit, and this is basically the implementation process as sort of measured against the GAMP 5 standard. We'll start at the upper left and go down in sort of a V, and we'll follow the line of the V. You start with your specification side, which is you start with user requirements, functional spec, design spec, module spec, simply a technical elaboration till we get to a point where there is a clear set of items that are going to be developed, and that becomes the solution itself. And then we sort of go up the right-hand side in terms of module testing, integration testing, functional testing, and then requirements testing. And as you can see from this diagram, and this is a recurring theme both with my information as well as Bill's, it's always about the requirements. It starts and ends with the requirements, making sure that what you set out to do is what you've ended up receiving. Because why? Your requirements are why you bought the solution, and therefore you need to make absolutely sure that as you're delivering this to your customers, Bill, and to anybody on the webinar that's either thinking about procuring our solution or already has, is that it's all about value. It's all about the enhancements and efficiency that our solution brings to your organization. And that concludes my conversation. We're now into the Q&A. I apologize for both Bill and I running a little bit later than expected.
No problem. Thank you, Bill, and thank you, Chaz. And apologies for a couple of the technical issues that we've had during the webinar moving slides on. Please bear with us for a couple of seconds while we collate the questions that have come in during the presentation. If you have any additional questions that you would like to submit, please do so now using the tools on the screen, or you can email me afterwards and I'll make sure they get answered for you. We'll try and answer as many as we can now, but we've only got a few minutes left, so I'll just propose a couple. So let's have a look at what we've got. Okay, so the first question that we've got in is, are you finding the UDI guidelines a challenge? Do you have any hints or tips that can help us implement it?
So really the answer would be no, and the reason why I say that is we've been, from a Boston Scientific perspective, we have been proactive. We've been working at this for over 2 years. So we've been active with various industry groups, with AdvaMed, so nothing really is a surprise to us. And all I would just say to folks that are at this point where you're like, what should we be doing? I mean, the point is you need to start acting. You are running out of time because it will take time to get ready for this UDI. And if you have a Class 3 device, you need to be compliant by September of next year. So if you haven't started, you need to move and move swiftly.
Great, thank you. So the next question that's come in, I think, is maybe aimed at both of you, both from the customer and the vendor point of view. If you had to say what was the biggest challenge in the whole of the implementation, what would it be?
Boy, that's a tough one. You're always going to have a situation. It's tough to please everybody, but I mean, to be honest, our implementation has gone very smooth. Like if the question is more to our global labeling controls project, we had upfront cross-functional team involvement. So the point is we developed the requirements together with our divisions. We partnered with our divisions. We partnered with our sites. So what we delivered is what they wanted. And I think it applies just with our relationship, Chaz. When you're developing a software system, you need to develop those requirements together. I mean, we've learned going back in time, in years ago, we would come up with a set of requirements and hand it over to a vendor, but we don't do that. It's at this point in time. We work with our vendor, Prism ID, and we make sure that if there's any issues or questions, with those requirements, we're addressing that upfront before the development starts. So the bottom line is when we get the solution, it meets the requirements.
I would certainly echo that, Bill. I mean, in some of the earlier projects, and again, all true of any enterprise software solution, is you can document requirements, and sometimes the documentation can mean different things to different people depending on their perspective or their roles or things like that. And I think that there have been some struggles historically, but the most recent project that we've worked on, I believe that we've gotten a lot better in terms of mutually defining and reaching that mutual understanding of what the system shall do this means, and so that we've got a much higher level of satisfaction in terms of what the end customer is going to see.
That's the whole meaning of a partnership, though, that you're working together. You don't ever expect right from the get-go it's going to be perfect, but we've worked through the years, and the systems have just gotten better and better and quicker and quicker.
Agreed.
Okay, great. We're actually running out of time there, so I'm going to stop the question and answer session, but as I said, we will be answering any of the questions that have come in during the webinar afterwards as part of a written Q&A. We'd just like to take this opportunity to give a huge thank you to Bill for participating with us today. It's been a great honor to have you with us. So we're going to wrap it up there. If you would like to see the presentation afterwards, it will be uploaded within the next 48 hours to our website, which is www.prismid.com. And for any other inquiries, please email me with the address that has been given to you. You can also follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn. Anyway, thank you again, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks.